"Dad, stop asking for money. It's embarrassing." That's what my son said over Thanksgiving dinner after I'd quietly carried his life for 18 months, paying off $50,000 of his wife's credit card debt, watching my name turn into their safety net and my late wife's memories get listed online as gifted by family. In that moment, something broke clean. The father who asked became the man who wrote terms. What followed was a year of contracts, wage deductions, public corrections, and a truth that cut deeper than money. Love keeps its shape only when it has edges. Before we dive into today's story, let us know where you're watching from. And as you watch, don't just sit back, be part of the experience. If a moment grabs your attention, whether it's powerful, unexpected, or deeply moving, drop a comment with the timestamp of that scene and share your thoughts. Your reactions bring the story to life, and we love seeing which moments resonate with you the most. And if you haven't already, hit subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a new story. Now, grab a coffee or tea, settle in, and let's begin. Portland, Maine, wore a pewter sky the morning I scraped frost from my pickup. Gulls skimmed Back Cove, cutting the wind as if they knew its moods. Breath fogged my scarf, and I thought of how winter works here. Not with drama, but with pressure. A quarter turn each day until metal carries its memory. I'm 63, a retired aircraft mechanic. 4 decades on hangar floors taught me to think in torque specs and to sign only when the bolts were true. The habit followed me home. Coffee at 6:10, mail banded by due date, basement bench squared to the inch. 4 years after my wife Julia died of cancer, the house runs on muscle memory. Her armchair sits in the sun bay, pale green, one cushion dimpled like a thumb pressed into clay. When I doubt myself, I look there and ask, "What would you say about money and boundaries?" The chair never answers, but it never lies. My son Ethan, 33, sells insurance with a voice that keeps promising tomorrow. He married Vanessa Cruz Hale, who curates secondhand finds online and turns everything into content. My daughter, Maya, 29, works nights as a nurse in Bangor and drives home at dawn. We are a small family, and for most of my life that was enough. The financial door opened the week of Ethan's wedding. I added him as an authorized user, emergencies only. Same rule we used in the hangar. Use only what prevents the crash. Emergencies should be rare. Over 18 months, the definition drifted. Designer fragrances and Newberry Street weekends, branded shipping supplies and photo backdrops. Subscriptions with cheerful names that renewed at midnight like Tidewater. None of it looked urgent. I live on Social Security and a small pension and still take in sewing machines from neighbors, calibrating belts and hooks for a little extra and for the feel of being useful. The garage smells like salt and oil. It's where I think best. Lately, I think hardest when the primary card lights up after midnight. Vanessa talks about cashback and how keen content lifts the family brand. Ethan says the deal is always almost there. I've believed him since he was 5 and trying to fix a kite with tape. A shoebox on my counter holds a year and a half of statements, months clipped tight, charges highlighted into yellow reefs. I added the columns with a pencil one night while the boiler popped in the basement. The total sat on my chest like a sandbag, $50,000. A mechanic doesn't shout inside a cockpit. I didn't shout. Thanksgiving is days away. I promised myself I would ask gently for a repayment plan, no scenes, just terms. I sanded the edge of a cabinet and rehearsed the lines, setting words into order like rivets in a straight run. Calm over anger, paper over talk. A man chooses his tools. Decency slides into avoidance faster than people admit. I let temporary run past its turnoff because the road was quiet and I wanted peace. The pantry holds generic soup. My winter coat is 10 seasons old. The thermostat sits at 66 unless friends visit. These are not sacrifices, just a ledger of trade-offs I made without writing them down. So I laid in anchors because anchors hold. The church bulletin rests under a chipped mug. The VFW calendar hangs by the phone. Neighbors still knock when they need a belt tightened or a stitch set right. In that world, we help, and we keep receipts. One afternoon, I opened the bank app and found tools I'd never used: freeze card, disable auto pay, remove users. I scrolled them like a man reviewing emergency procedures he hopes he'll never need. I locked the phone and told myself not to press anything unless someone forced my hand. Maya called on her break, voice tired but steady. "You okay, Dad?" she asked. "I'm fine," I said. She didn't push. She trusts me to be fair. Her worry is that I'll disappear myself in the name of keeping the peace. After we hung up, I touched the arm of Julia's chair and felt the woven fabric answer with the cool of a stored winter. I took out Julia's fountain pen and set it beside the shoebox. If the numbers were true, then a new rule set deserved a signature. Outside, the gulls were still working the wind. One stalled and tipped, then righted itself with a twitch of the wing, a correction as gentle as it is absolute. Before bed, I wrapped the cranberry mold for Ethan's and set it by the door next to the shoebox. Two fragile things headed to the same table, each asking to be carried level. The boiler clicked and the house settled like a chest after a long breath. I turned the armchair toward the window the way Julia liked in December and switched off the lamp. In the dark, I heard the siding test the wind and felt something inside me lock to a simple thought. Asking is the beginning of keeping faith with the truth. One afternoon, I opened the bank app and found tools I'd never used: freeze card, disable auto pay, remove users. I scrolled them like a man reviewing emergency procedures he hopes he'll never need. I locked the phone and told myself not to press anything unless someone forced my hand. Maya called on her break, voice tired but steady. "You okay, Dad?" she asked. "I'm fine," I said. She didn't push. She trusts me to be fair. Her worry is that I'll disappear myself in the name of keeping the peace. After we hung up, I touched the arm of Julia's chair and felt the woven fabric answer with the cool of a stored winter. I took out Julia's fountain pen and set it beside the shoebox. If the numbers were true, then a new rule set deserved a signature. Outside, the gulls were still working the wind. One stalled and tipped, then righted itself with a twitch of the wing, a correction as gentle as it is absolute. Before bed, I wrapped the cranberry mold for Ethan's and set it by the door next to the shoebox. Two fragile things headed to the same table, each asking to be carried level. The boiler clicked and the house settled like a chest after a long breath. I turned the armchair toward the window the way Julia liked in December and switched off the lamp. In the dark, I heard the siding test the wind and felt something inside me lock to a simple thought. Asking is the beginning of keeping faith with the truth. I reached for what Julia taught me: say it once, then act. No storm speeches, no theatrics. I opened the bank app beneath the tablecloth and watched toggles slide left like switches on a familiar panel. Authorized users went dark one by one. Recurring auto pays unlocked and disappeared. The emergency line froze with a soft chime. The thumbprint prompt felt like signing my name to a rule I should have written months ago. I didn't announce anything. The turkey carved, gravy poured. Someone praised the crisp skin. Control, like faith, doesn't need witnesses. It needs a steady hand on the right lever. Across the table, Maya's eyes found mine, a braid of question, warning, and support. She didn't speak. Nurses know when a pulse has changed and when to keep two fingers there a moment longer. Ethan chuckled a practiced chuckle and asked Vanessa to pass the rolls, a cue meant to weld the moment shut. "Dad's overreacting," he told the heir, choosing audience over father. I met that with one line: level as a spirit level on a sill. You're right. I'll stop asking. From now on, we talk contracts, no heat, no invitation to debate. The word landed like an unfamiliar tool set on a familiar bench. Vanessa's phone began to vibrate in short, apologetic bursts. She flipped it face down and reached for the cranberry with steadier hands than her eyes suggested. Emails were arriving faster than politeness could keep pace. Conversation resumed in chopped pieces about Black Friday routes and which pie deserved first honors. Laughter rose half a notch too loud. Children thumped feet upstairs like a drum line out of sync. I pressed my fingertips into the stamped leaves and felt their tin-sharp pattern print themselves into my skin like a warning label. In my head, a ledger marked steps done and steps ahead, freeze, cancel, revoke. Next, assemble, consult, codify. The shoebox by the door had a new gravity. It was no longer a record, but a map. I kept tasting the tea metal taste and thinking of how winter tightens everything at once. Siding, seals, a man's jaw. When we cleared plates, I thanked Vanessa for the meal because gratitude and boundaries are not enemies. Ethan patted my shoulder in passing the way a manager reassures a client he means to ignore. The gesture joined the sentence he had used and found its place in a file I hadn't planned to open today. Coats were fetched, containers were labeled for leftovers and lined up on the counter, too curated to be casual. Maya slipped past with stuffing under foil, touched my elbow, and kept moving. Good nurses triage without speeches. I carried the mold and the quiet weight of paper to the door. At the threshold, I noticed a hairline crack flaring from the rim of a porcelain serving plate. It would hold tonight, maybe next year too, until one day it wouldn't. Boundaries cracked the same way, quietly at first, then all at once. In the driveway, my phone thrummed with the first automated emails confirming what I already knew I had done. The wind off Back Cove smelled like early snow. Morning would measure my decisions. Black Friday would find out what emergency only finally meant. Black Friday came in on a blue edge of dawn, the kind that makes roofs look plated and streets sound hollow. The boiler thumped once and settled. I stood at the kitchen window, shoulders squared to whatever the day would ask. My phone started its staccato, vibrations marching across the counter, subject lines stacked before I even unlocked it. Payment failed, card declined, authorization removed. Outside, the street still held last night's salt, white scars along the curb, and the trash barrels knocked crooked by wind. I let them pile for breaths the way I used to let an engine idle. Then I opened the thread. Ethan's text ran from confusion to accusation in minutes. He was at a big box checkout. He had a cart. People were watching. Vanessa's emails arrived in polished sentences, CCing Maya. She wrote of brand growth, marketing spend, family investment, temporary float, and requested immediate reinstatement. I refused the adrenaline script. I put the phone on Do Not Disturb and pulled a yellow legal pad from the drawer. Column 1, Merchants. Column 2, Amounts. Column 3, Cancellation Receipts, time to the minute. Document first. Argue later. The house steadied me. The boiler's low hum, the light on Julia's armchair. On the counter, the empty cranberry container reflected the ceiling like a dull mirror, difficult contents. I brought the shoebox to the table and opened the lid. Paper fanned. I clipped by month and ran a highlighter across the repeating entries. VNSS Curated LLC from 600 to 1900, backdrop rental, affiliate platform, shipping suite. I penciled the total across 18 months and circled it once. $50,000. Ethan called. I let it go to voicemail. Refusal is an action, not avoidance. When it finished, I played it. He framed the cutoffs as making them look bad. Image over substance. It went into a mental file I labeled for later inspection. Another email from Vanessa followed with headers. She renamed the card a family operational card and claimed their content benefited the Hale name. I printed and stapled it. Language matters when terms harden. Then I texted Ethan 2 words, come by. I chose the tone of a foreman, not a father. I cleared the dining table and laid out the map, statements, bank logs, and a 1-page repayment agreement template I had drafted the night before. Amount, APR 5.5%, 36 months. Auto pay on the 5th. A signature line marked with an X. When Ethan arrived, his jaw was tight. I kept my voice steady and pointed at the totals, then the clause barring any business expense on my card. He didn't look at the numbers long. His eyes scanned the room. He talked about humiliation, timing, about Vanessa's audience watching their holiday. Sign, I said, keeping the word plain. He didn't. He stood, closed the door carefully, and the latch clicked. I wrote refused beside the X with the same hand I used to sign off airframes. A buzz from Maya arrived as I capped the pen. A link and 4 words. You should see this. I tapped the link. Posh Loop opened. Vanessa's resale shop tiled with handbags and coats. Some items wore a tag, gifted by family. I scrolled and then stopped. Julia's pale green wool coat stared back, the cuff stitching unmistakable, the tiny thread pull near the left pocket where we'd caught it one February. Air went thin in my chest. The mechanic took over. I screenshotted the listing, zoomed, checked for any doubt, and printed 2 copies and added them to a new tab labeled Unauthorized Disposition of Property. Memory and consent cut deeper. I opened a fresh page and wrote a single word at the top. Lines. I drafted an email, acknowledgement of the debt total, a demand to cease selling family property, a request to remove gifted by family tags, an invitation to sign the plan within 14 days. Timing is leverage. I would not waste either. My hands needed to fix something small. I oiled the basement hinge squeal that had been nagging my ear. I set a ladder and tightened a loose gutter screw by a quarter turn. Back inside, I nudged Julia's armchair half an inch toward the window, the December angle she liked. Small alignments after a jolt. Dusk arrived early, going purple over the street. The printed screenshot of Julia's coat lay on top of the stack, a thin rectangle that radiated cold through the paper. I switched off the kitchen light and stood in the doorway to the front room, watching the chair's outline hold its shape against the pane. Policy, then law, I said to myself. A checklist whispered under breath. I slid the repayment template, the draft email, and the screenshot into a folder and labeled it in block letters. Action 14 days. The boiler hummed at home. The calendar turned the deadline into a square to point at. I capped the pen and set it beside the folder. Some mornings the work is wrenches and seals and patience measured in clicks. Today it was sentences, numbers, and the simple faith that boundaries once drawn can hold. I set the folder in the center of the table and straightened it until the edges aligned, then turned down the thermostat and listened for the click that told me the system understood. Morning came through the kitchen blinds and narrow ladders, the kind of light that invites order. I brewed coffee, cleared a square of table, and chose paper over heat. The soft plan had to be real enough to carry weight if it needed to, tidy enough to show I was not swinging a hammer at a watch. I printed a clean 36-month repayment schedule at 5.5% APR with auto pay on the 5th, then a 1-page cover note in the cadence I learned on hangar floors. Subject, numbers, steps, signature. No adjectives, no thunder. I added a separate clause that barred any business use of my accounts. Tools first, emotions later. I built a small triage kit so success had a chance. The church credit counselor's card went into the packet, along with a spreadsheet template for cash flow and a short guide to setting up automatic transfers from their checking account to mine. Every sheet was stapled and labeled. When I stack paper cleanly, my pulse slows. You can hear discipline in the way a staple bites. The email subject line read, "Repayment Plan, Draft for your review." In the body, I laid out installments, a modest grace provision for one missed pull each year and the routing information for their account. The tone was spare and professional. I signed with love because I still have it, but I kept love out of the math. Then I hit send and set the packet by the door in case a hand delivery turned out wiser than a file attachment. Vanessa's reply arrived dressed for court. She called the charges brand investment and the timing seasonal cash flow float. She wrote that my card had historically functioned as our family operational card and proposed that I would benefit from the brand halo once things scaled. I printed her email and ran a highlighter through each phrase that tried to recast consent after the fact. In the margin, I wrote a sentence for myself: terms are earned before spend, not after. I filed the printout under positioning. I mailed a reservation of rights letter that afternoon. It recorded the principal at $50,000, cited the cancellation of autopays, stated plainly that further use would be treated as unauthorized, and set a 14-day window to execute the plan. The post office smelled like tape and dust and civic duty. I watched the clerk apply the barcode and felt a small click of alignment, like a latch finding its strike plate. Maya swung by after night shift with coffee and that strip of dawn look nurses carry home. We stood in front of Julia's closet and straightened what lived there. The empty hanger where the pale green coat once hung gaped like a missing tooth. We didn't say the coat's name. We didn't need to. She squeezed my hand once and left me to finish the row. Later in my journal I wrote, "Don't let sorrow hold the wrench. Policy turns grief into rails." The line steadied the room. At St. Brendan's, I fixed a sticky organ key that had been ghosting the hymns. The problem was a tired felt bushing. I trimmed it, reseated the pin, and listened as the scale rose clean. Small tolerances make big steadiness. Father Paul thanked me and slid the parish counselor's card into my pocket, a quiet vote for the path I was on. The inbox went mostly quiet. Ethan did not engage. Vanessa forwarded 2 sponsorship emails flagged on hold, pressure without saying pressure. I starred them, added them to the file, and did not reply. 3 days before the deadline, I sent a neutral reminder. 3 days remained to finalize the plan, auto pay form attached. On the calendar, I marked the square with a small dot, not an X, because dots can become lines or disappear, and either is data. The 14th day closed without a signature. Silence can be a kind of answer. I stapled the untouched auto-pay form behind the reservation letter. By mid-afternoon, the counter-strike arrived. Vanessa posted a slick video titled "Financial Abuse" by Filthy Rich Dad, minor key music flowing under pale window light. The script carved me into a caricature. Controlling, stingy, bent on wrecking a young couple's future. Cut-ins showed a full cart abandoned at checkout, her hand near tears, captions about dream-crushing. She never used my name, but the comments didn't need one. A father, a card, a villain. The internet fills blanks like foam fills a mold. The algorithm did what algorithms do. Duets and stitches multiplied. Sympathy hung heavy in one lane. Skepticism gathered in another, where viewers began posting screenshots from Poshloop, including Julia's coat listing with the chirpy "gifted by family" caption. Threads tangled. Someone clipped a frame of my elbow at Thanksgiving and wrote a novel about what elbows mean. I archived the video and copied URLs and timestamps into a spreadsheet. Nina emailed a narrow cease and desist draft that targeted false claims about my income, an alleged operational card, and obstruction. Facts only, she reminded me. No oxygen for a fire that feeds on air. At the hardware store, a neighbor gripped my forearm and said he hoped I was holding up. A good man's code for "I've seen the feed." On the church steps, another man looked away as if courtesy were contagious. Reputation had entered the math. I wrote a new sub-index on my packet, "Public Representations versus Records," and began sliding items behind the tab, screenshots, bank exports, the coat print, and Vanessa's email renaming my card with the corporate sheen of a policy that never existed. Robbins, their attorney, accepted mediation with the brevity of someone whittling options. Late afternoon downtown, neutral office, sleet in the forecast. Nina briefed me beforehand in a conference room that smelled faintly of toner. Keep your voice low. Anchor every assertion to a page. Don't argue motive, argue terms. She flagged 3 exhibits to land like rivets: the ledger of debt, the pale green coat listing, and the email christening my card a family operational card. I aligned my legal pad with the wood grain and felt the steadiness that comes from squared corners. We arrived early. Vanessa kept her phone face down on the table as if that counted as virtue. Ethan's knee tapped under the veneer. Robbins wore certainty like cologne. The mediator was a soft-spoken man with calm glasses. He outlined ground rules and nodded us forward. Robbins opened with a pitch about gifts versus loans, a seasonal float to build a brand, and a proposal for no interest with goodwill payments when able. The language sounded smooth until you pushed it with a fingertip. Nina didn't push. She read, slow and even, the dates and amounts and messages promising repayment, sliding exhibits across the table as each sentence came due. The paper did the talking I'd waited too long to let it do. When she laid the color print of Julia's coat listing in the center, the room temperature shifted. Vanessa's face opened into a rehearsed sympathy that didn't quite reach her eyes. Robbins asked for 5 minutes. Ethan watched the print the way a pilot watches ice form on a wing. Disbelief, then calculation. Back on record, Nina recited the terms we were offering to accept. Full repayment of $50,000 plus $2,800 tied to tagged listings, 6% interest, a 36-month schedule with automatic payroll deductions and wage garnishment on default, and removal and correction of public claims within 72 hours. The remedies were specific because mush breeds trouble. Robbins leaned back and countered with a smaller principal acknowledgement, no interest, best efforts payments, and a vague content clarification. Nina underlined automatic deductions and specific remedies, then slid the pen aside. Ethan gripped the edge of the table and muttered that I was ruining their name, that sponsors were on the line. I kept my eyes on the ledger. Use only what prevents the crash, I said, even and flat. The mediator coughed into his sleeve and observed that the document supported loans, not gifts, and that any court would prefer papers to feelings. Fax had found a microphone. Robbins requested a cooling-off interval, huddled with his clients, and returned with the same proposal, wearing a different adverb. Nina closed her folder with the quiet of a door that fits. "We're done for today," she said. Outside, sleet stippled our coats into a common color. On the walk to the car, Nina outlined next steps. File if no signed plan within 5 business days, include the public falsehood count if the video remained live. Prepare a narrow public statement if necessary. Action has a sound, it's not loud. At home, I logged the session the way I'd log a test run. Participants, exhibits referenced, proposals offered and refused, next milestones. I sharpened 2 pencils I might not need and squared the stack in the red-tabbed folder. The armchair kept its patient light. I felt tired the way a body feels after doing the right work, the kind that doesn't thrill but holds. The clock runs now. Nina's drafts live in my inbox, ready to fly. Maya texted, "I've got your back," from a break room somewhere between alarms. I set the phone down and listened to the boiler gather itself. The next move belonged to them unless their past emails made the move for them, and paper has a way of walking into the future whether people mean it to or not. If you're still watching and learning from this turn, comment 1 below to stay with me. Now hold steady. Ink lands on the line, but the echo goes public. 5 business days after mediation, morning light hung on the kitchen clock like a steady hand. I stacked Nina's draft complaint beside the red-tabbed folder and stuck a yellow note on top. Sign plan by 5 p.m. today, or we file. The house was quiet the way a hangar gets before a test run. Everything checked, nothing moving yet. I opened a new email and restated the offer in clean lines. $50,000 principal plus $2,800 tied to tagged listings, 6% interest, 36 months, automatic payroll deductions, wage garnishment on default, removal of false online claims within 72 hours, no business use of my accounts going forward, lien on their SUV if 2 consecutive payments were missed. I read it once more, clicked send, and let the cursor stop blinking. 2 replies arrived with different temperatures. Robbins answered with a curt received. A minute later, Vanessa texted, "You're destroying my work." I drafted 5 sentences citing the coat, the tags, and the plan, then deleted them. Silence can be policy. Not every knock needs opening. I made coffee and let the mug warm my hands. Maya called from a hospital stairwell. I could hear the soft reverb of concrete and fluorescent hum. "Hold steady, Dad," she said. The phrase fit like a torque wrench, one click to tell me enough is enough. We hung up. At 1:12 p.m., Robbins emailed that they would come to Nina's office at 3:30 to discuss execution. I printed the email, initialed the margin, and placed Julia's fountain pen across the folder like a compass needle pointing forward. At Nina's conference room, we rehearsed once more. Talk terms, not motives. Answer every question by pointing to a page. If they reached for pity, pivot to signature lines. Nina added a writer, a drafted correction statement ready for Vanessa to post with timestamps to verify compliance. We stacked exhibits in the order they would land: ledger, coat listing, email renaming my card. I squared my legal pad to the wood grain and breathed in for 4, out for 4, the old checklist cadence I used to use before walking the length of a wing. They arrived looking thinner than last week. Vanessa's face was bare, eyes swollen. Ethan's tie seemed to be arguing with his throat. Robbins made weather small talk nobody caught. We sat. He opened with a modified offer. Acknowledge $35,000 as loans, treat the rest as gifts, no interest, best efforts payments, a clarification post about misunderstandings. Nina slid our offer back across the table and tapped the places their initials would go. No commentary, just positions. Paper spoke the way instruments speak when air is smooth. Tabs landed 1, 2, 3, transfers and promises to repay. The color print of Julia's coat captioned "Gifted by Family," the email christening my card a family operational card. Without a mediator, the room felt smaller and cleaner. This wasn't a feeling seminar. Ethan's jaw set. He said I was ruining their name, that sponsors were already skittish. I kept my eyes on the contract and used the one line I had practiced. Use only what prevents the crash. The words leveled my breathing and reset the frame. Vanessa leaned in, voice a rasp. "I'll quit social media if we make this go away." Nina answered for me, even and unblinking. "Quit or continue is your choice. The plan is not." She pointed to the correction text requiring removal of the video, acknowledgement of misstatements, and an apology for implying I funded their operation by consent. Robbins asked for the room. Through the glass, I watched him talking low while Ethan's shoulders dropped and Vanessa's hands fluttered, then stilled. Decisions looked the same everywhere. A tiny collapse before the ink. They came back with a single request, a 5-day grace on the first pull. Nina nodded once. Pens clicked like latches. Ethan signed the repayment agreement. Vanessa signed the acknowledgement and the non-disparagement and correction rider. I signed only in the block labeled Creditor Acceptance. Payroll deduction forms listed Ethan's employer. ACH authorizations pointed to my account on the 5th. The default matrix spelled out wage garnishment and a lien on the SUV upon a second miss. Nina read each trigger aloud while Robbins initialed corners with the resignation of a man who knows his client is out of altitude and options. Right there in the conference room, Vanessa posted the agreed correction. The old video came down, the statement went up. Acknowledgement of misstatements, clarification that personal cards were used without agreed terms, apology for confusion created. Nina screenshotted every page with timestamps and links. She copied the files into our packet and closed it with a soft snap. Back home, I did aftercare the way a mechanic does after a hard flight. I rotated every password, enabled two-factor everywhere, and closed dormant credit lines. I photographed the signed pages and stored them on 2 encrypted drives, one in the safe with titles and passports, one with Maya per her request. Redundancy keeps families and airframes alive. Then I angled Julia's armchair a half-inch toward the window and returned the fountain pen to its drawer. In the pantry, I moved the generic soup forward and set a fresh loaf beside it. Hands remember life by making it. I lay down expecting turbulence and found sleep instead, heavy and clean. When I woke once, the house was quiet in a way that felt earned, as if operating limits had finally been written and accepted. A text blinked from Ethan. "We signed. I'll handle the payroll forms first thing." I replied with one word: received, because we can practice new language before we trust it. Dawn will bring the first autopay setup emails and whatever the social aftermath has left standing. The story shifts now from decision to consequence, from ink to habit. I set tomorrow's clothes on the chair back and crack the bedroom window to hear the boiler hum. A low, steady line under the night, the sound of a system doing exactly what it was built to do. The month turned the way Maine months do, quietly, with a gray ceiling and a clean edge of cold. And on the 5th, my phone chimed. Payroll deduction initiated. The notice read, Ethan's employer named in the header the amount aligning to the schedule we'd signed. A second ping showed the ACH deposit landing in my account to the minute. I opened the ledger, typed the figure, reconciled the cell, and sent a 2-word reply to Ethan's brief, sent. Received. Policy had become motion, and motion felt like air returning to a sealed room. Online, the temperature fell several degrees. Screenshots in my folder showed Vanessa's correction statement, posted as agreed, the old video gone, the captions scrubbed of their sharper barbs. Comments split and sputtered, but the storm lost heat, as storms do when they run out of oxygen. I printed the timestamps and added them to a tab marked Compliance, Public. It was a dry title for a wet subject, but dryness helps when memory tries to lacquer itself with feeling. Posh Loop adjusted itself too. The Gifted by Family tag disappeared from the site. Several items vanished altogether. A couple of returns arrived at my porch with brisk, apologetic notes from buyers I didn't know. Julia's coat was not among them. I opened the closet, looked at the gap where the pale green used to hang, and breathed through the old ache without building a shrine around it. I logged the absence under losses, non-recoverable, and closed the notebook before the ink smudged. At church, the handshakes were ordinary again. Father Paul nodded once, no extra warmth, which was its own kindness. Someone left a loaf of bread on my porch with a card that said, "Standing with you." I sliced the end piece and ate it at the counter without ceremony. Gratitude didn't need to post anywhere. It could live in the crumb and the butter and the quiet after a kettle clicks off. Work returned to the bench. 2 sewing machines arrived from neighbors, one with a wandering timing belt, one throwing bird's nests where stitches should be. I calibrated, adjusted the needle bar, tested on scrap cotton, until the loops formed clean and small like good habits. I invoiced modestly and wrote paid in a tidy square. Earned exchange has a feel, the weight of a $10 bill warmed by someone's palm and the small paperwork that says we see each other. Across town, budgeting started to show on the surface. Ethan traded the SUV for a used sedan with the kind of paint that looks better after a rinse than a waxing. Vanessa's content pivoted to living more simply, then to handmade items she actually made. The sponsor logos thinned, but their voices on the phone dialed down a notch. Less static, fewer spikes. We didn't talk about it. I logged what I could prove and left the rest to the slow mathematics of daily life. Maya suggested a Saturday run to the farmer's market, so we walked the aisles between crates of potatoes and jars of honey and old men selling dill. We talked about her night shift and a winter storm warning and whether the fishmonger's chowder was worth the line. The coat's absence hovered like fog behind an island, there but not in the channel we needed to navigate. We bought what we needed and not much more and drove home with the radio low. By dusk, jazz threaded the house. I set the thermostat to 66 and noticed the click carried a different tone. Choice, not fear. In the journal, I wrote a line that arrived fully formed. Steadiness is a habit, not a mood. The sentence looked right in Julia's fountain ink. Morning runs along Back Cove returned to my legs, slow, even pacing to match the payment cadence. Each mile checked a box in the spreadsheet I keep in my head, a simple exchange, effort for breath, breath for view. The inbox was mostly ordinary again, vendor confirmations, ACH notifications, and a single email from Nina. All filings suspended pending compliance, keep logging. I attached PDFs of this month's entries and sent them back with a note that read, filed. At the hardware store, the cashier asked about a hinge instead of the feed. I bought a box of screws I didn't strictly need. The bag's weight in my hand said the town and I were speaking the same language again. Then the envelope with teeth arrived. HOA letterhead, a polite font that always means trouble. I set it on the table, finished my tea, and opened it with the practiced calm of a man who has seen what panic does to bolts. The complaint claimed I'd threatened my son in a public venue, cited a nameless witness, and warned of community safety expectations. Heavy implication, light detail. Reputation twitched in a smaller, sharper wave. Response is a system. I drafted a short, factual reply asking for date and time and evidence. I logged the letter as HOA allegation and circled the board's next open slot on the calendar. Then I went to the Harbor Cafe where Ethan and I had met after the Posh Loop discovery. The manager, a man with careful hands, helped me pull the camera footage for the relevant hour. The video showed me seated and calm, Ethan animated but unthreatened, the cup between us untouched until it cooled. I sent the HOA a link with timestamps and a one-paragraph statement. I chose policy, not provocation. I CC'd Nina and shut the laptop lid with the relief of a tool returning to its drawer. Neighbors chose daylight. 2 of them wrote, unasked, that they'd known me 10 years and never seen me escalate a conflict. They offered to attend the board meeting. I thanked them without flourish. A day later, the board acknowledged receipt, withdrew the warning pending further review, and never named the anonymous filer. I filed the closure under HOA, resolved and deleted 3 unsent drafts that said more than necessary. On the community bulletin, I posted 2 sentences. A claim was made and reviewed. Video confirmed a civil meeting thanks to the cafe. Names omitted. Heat withheld. Record kept. Night settled. The month's second payment cleared without drama. I turned Julia's armchair a hair toward the window and wrote tomorrow's list. Farmers market at 9. Password audit for the bank at noon. A call to Ethan about the budgeting class at church. Consequences had hardened into routines. Repair was no longer a story beat. It was a practice repeated until it became the shape of the day. The second month's notice hit my phone on the 5th at the same neat minute, and my pulse barely moved. I logged the ACH in the ledger, reconciled the cell, and waited for the old reactions, tightness under the ribs, heat behind the eyes. Nothing came. Consequence had learned its cadence, and I was learning mine. I texted Ethan a neutral invitation to the Harbor Soup Place with one condition: no money talk unless you bring it. Steam fogged the cafe windows, gulls paced the railing like bored ushers. We ate chowder and talked about the used sedan, a nor'easter the radio promised, a client who wanted insurance against chance. I listened for tone, not apology. Stability has a sound, it stays inside the lines. When the bowls were empty, I slid one sheet across the table, time and address for the parish budgeting class. If you want it, it's there. Tools, not sermons. He folded the page into his wallet like a boarding pass he meant to use. The class met in the church basement. Folding chairs, whiteboard, steel carafe of coffee that tasted like intention. The counselor drew envelopes on the board and wrote zero-based. Spend on paper first. Build an emergency fund so panic has to knock. Target, 1,500. Ethan looked skeptical. Vanessa crossed her arms, then began taking notes. I watched hands, not faces. We seeded the fund with a simple rule. The first 300 of each month's discretionary money moves to a savings account labeled Not Today's Fire. Names matter. A label tells dollars what uniform to wear. The app made a clean lane for it. Before we left, I set one boundary plainly in shared air. No content featuring anything that belonged to Julia, past, present, or imagined. Vanessa's mouth started to argue and closed to accept. Copy that, she said, and the room gained half an inch. A new ritual began. After the payroll deduction, Ethan emailed a monthly statement screenshot without commentary. Vanessa forwarded a screenshot of the emergency fund, the numbers climbing like a slow tide. Accountability looked smaller than I expected, just rectangles of digits. But it worked. Saturday, Maya and I walked the farmer's market. We bought dill, potatoes, and honey. In the car, she asked if I was sleeping better. I said yes and meant it. She suggested updating my will while the air was calm. I agreed before modesty could disguise fear. At the attorney's office, I revised my will and beneficiary designations. We added a clause that any debt owed to the estate would be netted against inheritance, an arithmetic way to keep fairness from evaporating. Copies went into the safe and into Maya's hands. The signature felt less like a barricade than a map. That night I lit a candle before Julia's photo and said aloud that I was building rails, not walls. The house seemed to listen. Back at the bench, I cooked chowder with the dill, patched a frayed cuff, and oiled a stubborn window sash until it moved like a thought finally spoken. Repair is a practice. Meaning comes from repetition. Father Paul found me in the narthex and asked how the class went. They showed up, I said. That's how people change, he answered, by showing up the same day 2 weeks in a row. I pocketed the line like a spare fuse. On her feed, Vanessa posted short clips of crochet, thrift flips, and small wood frames she actually made. No heirlooms, no luxury hauls. Comments shifted from drama to craft tips. I dislike the economy of attention, but I respect the math of effort traded for result. Coffee with the retired hangar crew felt like sitting inside a good tool chest. We talked torquey and weather and the way age teaches you which sounds to keep. You can't fly on apologies, one friend said. You fly on checklists. I kept that too. Maya brought a small tin in the afternoon. Inside lay a single green button saved from Julia's coat. Not a replacement, a keepsake. I threaded it on a cord and hung it by the bench light where only solvent and sawdust visit. Memory kept, commerce-proofed. After dinner, I ran a security audit, passwords, two-factor freezes, alerts. I wrote a one-page SOP titled, If Something Goes Sideways, and taped it inside the safe door. Systems blunt panic. Habit outruns mood. By week's end, the spreadsheet told a new story. 2 on-time payments, the emergency fund at $600 and climbing, sedan insurance down $48 a month, content revenue modest but steadier. I emailed Nina a short status, compliant to date, continuing logs, and archived her reply. Quiet proof followed with no caption. Ethan paid a pediatric dental bill without calling. Vanessa posted a note crediting the class for teaching them to name the dollars. I didn't care for the phrase, but I liked the arithmetic. That night, I cracked the window and let the boiler's hum mix with salt air. I drafted 3 lines for next Thanksgiving's invitation. Clear time, clear boundaries, clear joy. When the app ticked the Not Today's Fire balance up to 900, I watched the numbers settle like a level finding center and turned out the light. A year to the week since I pressed the first toggle, frost stitched the porch rail and back cove wore a steel blue sheen that made the gulls look cut from tin. The boiler held a steady hum under the floorboards. I opened my ledger and traced the year's entries the way a hand traces a familiar seam. Each month a square, each square filled. Ethan had paid on time throughout, and last week he prepaid 2 months. Their emergency fund, a small line in my notes, had crossed 1,500. Numbers don't shout, they point. I reread the Thanksgiving invitation I wrote months ago. Clear time, clear boundaries, clear joy. Potluck assignment sat underneath in plain type. Maya on chowder and a bakery pie, Ethan and Vanessa on a casserole and napkins. Money talk off the table unless requested in writing. Warm, not pleading. I polished Julia's fountain pen, then put it away. No contracts today. The green button lay by the bench light. I turned the armchair to face the window, a private salute. They arrived early enough that the kitchen could still decide its mood. Ethan carried the casserole, Vanessa held a box of napkins. Maya came behind them with chowder that smelled like dill and harbor weather. No one scanned for a camera. Coats went on the rack, shoes aligned by the mat. Vanessa asked where to set the dishes instead of assuming. Ethan rolled up his sleeves without being asked. Small motions added up like bolts torqued to spec. We kept conversation ordinary on purpose. Weather, Maya's shifts, the sedan's mileage, a lamp Ethan rewired. The house breathed easier when no one reached for a lesson or a speech. Steam beaded the panes. Jazz threaded the room. The thermostat sat quietly at 66 by choice, not fear. Simple plates made a plain table, and I retired the cracked serving platter to trivet duty, honest about what it could still do. Mid-meal, my phone buzzed the routine ACH confirmation. I didn't open it. Payments had become background hum like the boiler, meant to be there, not to headline. Vanessa set a plain wooden frame by my plate made from salvaged molding rubbed with oil. For the button, she said. The words were soft, not staged. I nodded and placed the frame near the bench light where I planned to hang it. Ethan said, almost as an aside, that automatic deductions had taught him to think in pay cycles, not wishes, and that they had kept Not Today's Fire untouched for 3 months. He didn't say it to impress me, only to mark where he was standing. Maya watched more than she steered. When breath in the room changed, she said, "Feels easier to breathe in here." The sentence landed and stayed. Ethan started to say thank you. To me, to the year, to the idea of consequence, but I raised a hand and smiled. We're eating. The rule protected the table from turning into a podium. Gratitude can live without microphones. After dinner, we navigated the sink like people who had practiced it. Ethan scrubbed, Maya dried, Vanessa hummed with the radio and stacked plates into calm towers. I wiped the counter and realized 10 minutes had passed without measuring a single word. The room felt aligned the way a wing feels aligned when you can't hear anything but air. On the porch, sleet began to tick the rail. I held a mug and watched the street take on a reflective sheen. The coat had not come back, and I let that loss stand. The button stayed, and I let that keep vigil. In my head, I drew a line between theft repaid and loss carried, between justice and grief. Repair, I realized, had honored both. Back inside, Ethan laid an envelope on the counter, copies of payroll confirmation, and a spreadsheet of their budget. I left it sealed. Trust means you don't have to check in front of people. Vanessa stood by the bench light and in 2 sentences told a truth that mattered to her. Naming dollars gave me room to make things again. I didn't know the difference. Not confession or plea, just a report from a new instrument panel. We packed leftovers without bargaining over the good containers. Hugs were ordinary. At the door, Ethan said, "We'll see you next Saturday, mark it?" and waited for an answer like a real question. Yes, I said, and meant it. When the house was mine again, I reset the chairs, rinsed the last glass, and logged the ACH I had ignored during dinner. In my journal, I wrote one line: "We traded speeches for systems." The armchair kept its square of light, faithful as a shore marker. At the desk, I drafted a note I might send at Christmas. Thank you for showing up on the same day 2 weeks in a row. I slid it under a magnet and let it wait. Night settled. The framed button caught the lamp glow and turned it into a small, steady halo. I stood at the window and shaped the lesson I will carry forward. Love kept its shape because boundaries gave it edges. Morning came clear and wind broken, the kind of light that lays a bright blade across the bench and makes dust honest. The boiler kept its steady line underneath the floorboards. I decided to close the year the way I signed off airframes. No speeches, just a log. So the tone of the ending would point forward instead of backward. This is what I know now, written plain. I began the year confusing decency with delay. I kept telling myself I was being patient when I was really avoiding the work of drawing a line. Today, care comes with edges. Boundaries have become a form of love I can stand behind. Not a barricade, but a rail that lets a heavy thing travel without shaking itself apart. The day I stopped asking and started writing terms was the day dignity found a seat for everyone at the table. What was repaid and what was lost do not cancel each other. The money has a ledger. Principal, 6% interest, 36 months tuned to the fifth, each payment landing like a metronome. The lies have a correction, the video down, a statement up. And then there is Julia's coat, gone from our keeping, balanced by a green button that stays. I honor the debt repaid with receipts. I honor the loss carried by not buying it back with new harm. Systems beat sentiment. Ledgers, dots on calendar squares, ACH confirmations, security audits, a budgeting class in a church basement, a simple SOP in the safe, an armchair turned toward light. These are the small rituals that held when mood could not. I used to think the right words would fix the wrong pattern. Now I think the right pattern makes most words unnecessary, and the words that remain sound like tools: state, sign, file, review, rest. The world helped in ways I didn't know how to ask for. Neighbors chose daylight when an anonymous letter tried to make shadow work harder than it should. A cafe's camera showed two people seated and civil. Father Paul taught me that change looks like showing up the same day 2 weeks in a row. Nina's lawyering was a compass that doesn't blink. Facts repaired reputation without spectacle, and I learned to let daylight do its job. Mercy can stay quiet and still count. Vanessa's feed now shows things made by her hands. Ethan's budgeting shows up in a sedan that doesn't pretend, and a fund labeled "Not Today's Fire" left untouched. I can give credit without inflating it into absolution. They met the plan met them back. That is mercy enough for now. Forgiveness, for me, is not pretending none of it happened. Forgiveness is refusing to reopen the wound with new debt. It is forward permission under clear rules. I have no interest in amnesia. I have every interest in tomorrow's boundaries being so ordinary that no one notices them until they are needed. To the men my age who recognize themselves in the soft places where I stood too long, say no before your bones learn to ache from holding up other people's ceilings. Start with evidence. Put dates on paper. Ask a lawyer for one good letter and give it a job. Practice a sentence you can say without heat and repeat it until it feels like a level on a sill. You don't have to perform anger to protect what you built. Here is my checklist, distilled from a hangar into a house. State terms once. Document. Act, review, rest. I remember stating terms at Thanksgiving, documenting with a shoebox and a fountain pen, acting with toggles and letters, reviewing with ledgers and meetings, and resting the first night the boiler sounded like it belonged again. Next year is simple on purpose. Keep the will current and the beneficiary lines honest. Keep the log short and true. Keep running back cove even when the wind pretends to be bigger than it is. Keep the armchair angled toward light. Keep saying less and doing more. Keep systems tidy enough that grief doesn't have to drive. I owe Julia thanks. I can never finish paying. She taught me the craftsperson's patience that made a late life seam hold. How to look twice, how to turn the fabric so the grain runs true, how to lay out tools before the work begins. The green button sits in the small frame Vanessa made near the bench light, an emblem I can see when my hands forget the lesson and want to rush. When flares come, and they will, I have a mini SOP taped inside the safe door. If a plea arrives, check the ledger. If the ledger is silent, consult the plan. If the plan is clear, invite to class. Do not reopen the card. Rails, not walls. Rails carry weight and leave room for breath. The narrow public statement worked because it was short and true. There was no victory lap online, only a record that pointed to documents. I recommend restraint. Winning on the internet is a hunger that doesn't stop when you feed it. Quiet accuracy digests better. I have one sentence for my son to carry beyond money. Use only what prevents the crash. Spend it on time, on words, on pride. If the lever you're reaching for won't prevent the crash, it probably isn't your lever. For Vanessa, a twin line, make what you can stand behind. Craft over clout, product over plot. For Maya, who watched the pulse without telling it what to be, thank you for watching the pulse and letting me find my own. I place the button in its frame by the bench light and feel a small click somewhere between my ribs and my hands. Memory is preserved from commerce, grief kept as a clean, named thing. The year's ledger goes beside Julia's pen. I crack the window to hear the boiler's low assurance. I write one last line to keep. Systems held. Love endured. Then I close the log and let the house be quiet, aligned to its limits, ready for another ordinary day. In the quiet after endings, what remains is not the noise of conflict, but the shape of what held. There is a calm that comes when promises stop being spoken and start being kept, when the loudest thing in the room is the steady rhythm of ordinary systems doing their work. It turns out that resilience is less a sudden triumph and more a practiced alignment, small, repeatable choices that keep a life inside its rails. The heart of this journey is simple, even if it wasn't easy. Love keeps its shape only when it has edges. Care without boundaries dissolves into obligation. Generosity without terms becomes a slow erosion. The moment asking becomes agreement, dignity returns to both sides. No raised voices are required. A date, a number, a signature, and the discipline to honor them, these are the quiet instruments that tune a home back to pitch. Consider what was restored and what was released. Debts can be repaid. False stories can be corrected. Work habits can be relearned. But some losses ask to be carried rather than solved. To carry a loss is not to be defined by it. It is to respect its weight without putting it in charge. We live more cleanly when we let grief be a named thing, not a currency for bargaining or a tool for theater. Boundaries are not walls, they are working rails. Rails allow heavy cargo to move without shaking itself apart. When the track is true, even a difficult journey can be steady. A life with edges makes room for breath. It makes room for accountability, too. Systems, ledgers, schedules, confirmations, audits do not replace compassion. They prevent compassion from becoming self-abandonment. They let affection travel on something stronger than impulse. There is wisdom in the unglamorous disciplines, a calendar square marked with a dot, a ledger line reconciled at the end of the week, a budgeting class in a basement where the coffee tastes like intention, a security review that closes a door no one should walk through. These are not dramatic gestures, they are the craft of adulthood, the checklist that keeps the wings attached when weather turns. Reputation heals in daylight, not through performance. A short, true statement travels farther than a long, angry one. Facts recorded without flourish mend what rumor phrase. The strongest answer to distortion isn't a louder story. It's a verifiable record that doesn't need an audience to stand upright. When truth is documented, it can afford to be quiet. Forgiveness, rightly understood, is permission for tomorrow, not amnesia about yesterday. It is the decision to stop reopening the wound with new harm. It does not require pretending that nothing happened. It requires honoring what did happen by refusing to repeat it. In that sense, boundaries are an act of mercy to oneself and to others. They teach everyone involved how to keep faith without being asked twice. If you are carrying your own tangle of loyalty and fatigue, there is a way through that is both kinder and firmer than either silence or explosion. Start where machinery starts, with inspection. Write down the facts. Gather the dates. Separate the debt that can be repaid from the loss that must be carried. Ask for counsel from someone whose job is clarity. Choose one sentence you can say without heat, and let it be the level you set on every conversation that follows. Then trade speeches for systems. State the terms once, put them on paper. Sign not to threaten but to anchor. Let automatic processes do the heavy lifting so that willpower can return to being human instead of heroic. Review at regular intervals, rest in between. When a boundary is working, it feels almost boring. Boring is not a failure. It is the quiet hum of health. Repair does not mean a return to the past. It means the future stops resembling the worst parts of the past. The change is often small and cumulative. A bill paid on time, a statement sent before anyone asks, a quiet correction posted where a louder mistake once stood, craft replacing clout as the measure of value. There is dignity and modest improvement in letting a new habit reach steadiness without applause. When flares arrive, as they always will, reach for the standard operating procedure you wrote while the air was calm. Check the ledger before you check your temper. Consult the plan before you consult your pride. Invite learning before lending again. Keep the rails in place. If a plea is honest, it will respect the track. If it is not, the track will protect you from the velocity of someone else's panic. For those who have spent years mistaking self-sacrifice for love, here is a different picture. Love that refuses to volunteer for harm. Love that will sit at the table with clarity and still serve soup. Love that chooses truth over theater and boundaries over resentment. That kind of love does not harden the heart. It clarifies the root. It leaves room for growth, apology, and new patterns that don't require old pain to continue. This is the craft of a good life in later seasons. Keep documents short and true. Keep habits small and steady. Keep the circle of counsel wise and limited. Keep your attention on the work of today rather than the performance of yesterday. The strongest lives are built like sound machines, simple where they can be, reinforced where they must be, maintained before they fail. And perhaps the clearest lesson is this: you can choose a gentler strength. You can be firm without drama, generous without erasing yourself, forgiving without forgetting, resolute without rage. You can let systems carry the strain so your voice can stay level and your hands can keep making a life worth inhabiting. In this way, the ordinary becomes a sanctuary. In this way, what was once a crisis becomes a set of instructions for peace. Thank you for spending this time here. If these reflections speak to your own crossroads, if they helped you breathe easier, draw a line, or see a path where there wasn't one, share your thoughts below. Tell us what sentence you plan to carry forward, or what small system you're ready to put in place. Your experiences help others recognize their own, and your perspective might be the compass someone else needs. We'd love to hear where you're watching from and which moment landed hardest for you. Drop a comment with the point in the story that made you pause, or the principle you'll try this week. If you found value in this journey, consider subscribing and turning on notifications so you won't miss what comes next. Stories about resilience, boundaries, and the quiet tools that keep families, finances, and hearts aligned. Your voice keeps this community honest, your presence keeps it generous, and your engagement. Now take a breath. Check your calendar dot. Write your one calm sentence. and step into tomorrow with edges that fit your love, systems that fit your life, and the kind of steadiness that no feed can counterfeit. We'll be here when you're ready for the next chapter of courage written in ordinary ink. Consider also the power of naming things accurately. When we name a debt as a debt, we free generosity to be generous again instead of becoming a disguise for pressure. When we name a boundary as care, not punishment, we invite others to meet us as adults. When we name a loss as a loss, we stop spending our energy trying to make it behave like a problem with a fix. Language is a tool. Kept sharp, it cuts clean. Allowed to rust, it tears. There is room here for hope, but not the brittle kind that depends on other people behaving perfectly. Hope worth carrying is built from the pieces you control, what you track, what you sign, what you decline, what you keep. It looks like a savings account that learns a name and keeps it, like a calendar reminder that shows up even when moods don't, like a plan that can be printed and placed on a table without anyone having to clear their throat first. This is not cold or transactional. It is a way to make care sustainable. Thank you for staying to the end, for bringing your attention and your courage to a space built on steadiness rather than spectacle. Add your voice below. What practice are you starting? What boundary are you honoring? What truth are you willing to say once and then live? We read every note. We learn from the patterns that repeat in your lives and ours. If this resonated, subscribe and turn on notifications so you'll always have a place to return to when you need a reminder that ordinary tools are powerful, that measured words can be brave, and that quiet integrity travels farther than noise. Share this with someone who might be standing at their own threshold and could use a clear sentence and a steady hand. We're grateful you're here, and we look forward to walking the next miles with you. One ledger line, one calm breath, one right-sized act of care at a time.